young people to have mentors and know who to turn to in writing.
Hello and welcome back to my YouTube channel. I am Gabriel Deji, the author of The Escape, and I am back with another solo video where I'm going to be speaking more about the themes of the novel. So today's topic is going to be about music. Last episode was a Q&A where I touched on the theme of music, but today we're going to deep solely into this theme of music because music is really important to The Escape. It shapes the way the characters interact with each other, and it shapes a lot of the situations that the characters find themselves in. And this video is based on an article I've written. It will be published on my website soon. You can find that at gabrieldeji.ampbk.com. So this article about music will speak about just the way music inspired me as an author and the way that this inspiration flowed through the novel. So we'll start off with King Keys, the perpetually pensive poet. I've said before that King Keys was a character that I had created long before the novel had came out. And the reason that I had created King Keys, the perpetually pensive poet, is that I'm someone who's deeply interested in music. I've been playing the piano for 11 years. You can see videos of me playing piano on my Instagram. Yes, I'm deeply interested in music. Also in my ITV and BBC Radio London interview, you can see me playing the melodica. The song I played was Colonial Mentality by Fela Kuti. He was an activist and a musician in 1970s Nigeria. If you're interested in learning more about Fela Kuti, I will speak about him later on in this video. And you can listen to his music. You can see the way he fought back at the colonial powers in his country, at the corruption at the leaders of his own country, and the elitism. So those themes are really important, and again I will touch back on that later on in this video. But I'll start off with yes, I have said I'll start off with King Keys, the perpetually pensive poet. So I was interested in making an album myself when I was younger. That is my dream. That is something that I'm still interested in. I'm still interested in making music. So I was interested in making a loose concept album. So a concept album means an album where there's a story or there's a theme that links all the songs together. Recent examples of this are Psychodrama by Dave, which won the Mercury Prize. A loose concept album would be Gang Signs and Prayer by Stormzy. Not every single song is a story, it's not all intertwined. However, there is the loose theme of gang and violence and aggression, and then the prayer, which is the gospel themes, which shapes Stormzy's music. So those are two examples that are very recent. If you know some other concept albums, you can leave them down below. Albums where there's stories that interlink them from beginning to end. So one concept album that was very dear to me was Black Radio by Robert Glasper. The first time I heard this, I was blown away. One of the reasons was the loose concept album that I wanted to make was supposed to be one that fuses all the themes and all the sounds of traditional, or I wouldn't even use the word traditional, but I would say music from black origin. So I was aiming to fuse jazz music with hip hop, with spoken word poetry, and all other types of themes of black music. And when I heard Black Radio by Robert Glasper for the first time, which I also urge any of my viewers to listen to, I was astounded because that was essentially the exact album that I wanted to make, and I have Black Radio on vinyl. And when I read the liner notes of the vinyl, it was astounding to me that Robert Glasper addressed the fact that he was fusing all these themes of black music together. Robert Glasper is a jazz musician, but he was writing in it how he was revolting against the way that black music had basically been diluted, is being made open to all, which is not necessarily a bad thing, but he wanted to return to the purity of black music. He included rock there, which is no longer seen as a form of black music, but was created by black people. So he brought all of these together, which is why The Escape is a tale of change and revolution, because all the themes of music that inspire the novel, that are part of the novel, are songs that are made from revolt. Black music typically has been made as forms of anti-establishment. They're made to channel the ideas of protest that are dear to these characters. For example, Fela Kuti in Nigeria, who was making Afrobeat there is a difference between Afrobeat and Afrobeats. You can search that difference up for yourself. But Fela Kuti was making Afrobeat to fight against the corruption and to voice his anti-establishment views. There's hip-hop, which is made to give people a voice in working class communities, specifically black people, against the oppression and the problems that they found within their own community. Even rock music, it comes from people who are fighting against the oppression, racial oppression within America, and so on and so forth. So these themes were really important to the novel. But even further from there, so moving away from the character of King Keys, the perpetually pensive poet, me as an author, I had music flowing around me as I wrote the novel. For every single chapter I had albums, not even one album but multiple albums, that I used to help me get inspired about what I was writing about. For example, when the characters are flying through the air, they're listening to Miles in the Sky by Miles Davis, or I'm saying they're listening to, but really it was me, the author, listening to Miles in the Sky, because it's an album that makes me think about flight. So whilst the novel's characters are flying, I'm listening to an album that makes me feel like I'm flying, so I can really access what they're going through at the time. And a fun fact about the idea of flying is that if you look at the cover of The Escape, it fades from light blue to white at the top, which is essentially the colours of the sky, because flight is so important to the novel. But there are other themes as well. For example, I listened to Zed by SZA. Many of you will know SZA as an R&B artist. Most of you know her for making breakup songs, but before that her mixtape Zed was a mixtape about introspection and isolation. So in the beginning of the novel, where Ramel Brathwaite is in his room thinking, unsure about himself, I was listening to Zed by SZA to get me in that mood. And there are many other albums that I was listening to while I was writing this novel. See, I call it an album because before it was a novel. To me, in my head, it was really an album. But yes, I was listening to Spirit Fiction by Ravi Coltrane, the son of John Coltrane. I was listening to Alice Coltrane while I was writing this book, David Bowie, Chance the Rapper, all sorts of artists, a plethora of different sounds that I was using to really access the emotions and the scenery that these characters had around them. So even further on in the novel, there's a theme of revolution in the Changemakers event. So we see a character called Leroy Kalin playing a melodica. We see fighting between them, not fighting physically, but fighting against the powers that be, really. And there is a mention very often about the revolution not being televised. Many of you will know that this comes from Jill Scott Heron's spoken word poem, The Revolution Will Not Be Televised. And the meaning of that poem was that the revolution is never going to be what we see on the streets, it's never going to be the protests that we see on the media. The revolution is supposed to be a mental change. The revolution is something that happens within you, which is what the characters are speaking about. They speak about free will, they speak about activism, they speak about being controlled by the powers that be, which is why the revolution shall not be televised, because the revolution is internal. So even further from Jill Scott Heron's spoken word poem, and Jill Scott Heron, a fun fact is that he's often spoken about as the godfather of rap, in the way that he was using spoken word over music, and eventually that transformed into what we now know as rap or hip-hop music. But even further on, I did say I'll speak about Fela Kuti during this video. So these artists, Revolution or the Uncensored Change, you can choose which one you want to call them. As they perform, they're called Revolution, but in the wider activities that they do, they are called the Uncensored Change. And music is really important to them. I'll dwell into them right now. So they shout very often words like sorrow, anger, tears, and the meaning of that is that as I was writing this novel, I was part of my school's jazz band, me and my fellow jazz band members. So shout out to Deji, Joseph and David if you're watching this video. The members of our jazz band, we all really like Fela Kuti, and one of the songs that we were learning as I was writing the novel is Sorrow, Tears and Blood by Fela Kuti, which is a really important song where he's basically talking about suffering. And a fun fact again, I have a lot of fun facts this video, Burna Boy, the artist, in his song Yay, he samples Sorrow, Tears and Blood. So if you're interested in Burna Boy, you might be interested in Fela Kuti, so definitely have a listen. But the whole idea is that when there's suffering, when there's revolution, all of it can be voiced through music. All this aggression, all this protest is really important to be able to channel these properly, which is why Fela Kuti is very influential in this novel, even when King Keys or Leroy Kalin are playing their melodica and there's these sounds of traditional Afrobeat and jazz. Tony Allen is mentioned quite often. Tony Allen was the drummer of Fela Kuti, and he was really inspirational to the sound that Fela Kuti made. And he was also very politically active himself. So wherever it is in the novel, protest and activism and rage and everything can really be voiced through music. And I did say I'll speak about the uncensored change. So there is a plot twist in the novel, and if you haven't read the novel yet, make sure to read it before coming back to this bit. It's really important that I don't spoil it for you. But the characters of the uncensored change, each of them have very particular names. For example, there's one character whose name is Bob, his real name is Robert Dylan, and you can guess there's a reference there to the artist Bob Dylan. And there's a reference to a Swedish Somali man in the novel whose name is Lonnie Lynn. This is the real name for the rapper Common. And there's also an artist called Nicola West. That's a reference there to the bass player called Nick West. So you can see that all the characters in the Uncensored Change are named after musicians. And that's a really big plot twist in the novel, because Ramel asks himself, do these people really exist? Because he sees pictures of these artists, and then he sees pictures of these artists, and he remembers what the Uncensored Change looks like, and he realizes that all of them are actually musicians that he might have heard from before. So he has to ask himself, are they really real? Are they not? He's really confused about that. So the Uncensored Change, they're all based upon artists, and a lot of them are revolutionary artists themselves. So the theme of music is really important, specifically to the theme of revolution, of activism. But also, as I mentioned in my past video, multiculturalism is really important to the escape. The idea of a community of different cultures that we see in London. And the UK jazz scene really shows the multiculturalism that we have in London, which is why the UK jazz scene is mentioned quite heavily in this novel. Artists like Ezra Collective, artists like Joe Armand Jones, artists like Zara McFarlane, all of them are mentioned quite frequently. And the reason that they're mentioned quite frequently is that there was an album, We Out Here. It was a compilation album put out by the Brownswood Recording Company. And essentially, it's a compilation of many different UK jazz artists, but together they're making this multicultural sound. So you can hear influences from 1970s Nigeria. You can hear references to like electronic music in the London scene. You can hear references to neo soul, to gospel, all of that. All these forms of music that are really important to the multiculturality of London are prevalent within the album, and that's also something that inspired me to make this book. Even in the liner notes of the We Out Here compilation album vinyl, which I also own, they speak about the way the album is a form of protest against the very, far-right sentiments that came out after the Brexit and after the release of the Windrush scandal, where you can see a very deep hostility that there is in this country against immigrant communities. So even though I've mentioned the idea of protest, when I talk about the UK jazz scene, it's not solely about protest. It's also about multiculturality, and that's why these artists are mentioned so often in the book. And I do have to apologise again, because I mentioned before, Nubia Garcia, I mentioned your name in the book, a very fantastic artist from the UK jazz scene who has an album coming out soon. I did spell your name wrong in the novel, so please forgive me if you've heard. I did mention it in my BBC Radio London interview, which is also on my channel, but I mention it again here. But that does bring this episode to an end. It's been really inspiring for me to speak about music and the escape. Music is something that is really dear to me, and I hope you really enjoyed this novel, this episode, and I do hope that you enjoyed the novel as well. So one thing I did forget to say, not only is this video important, because the black music is important. It's also important because June was African American Music Month. So we do need to respect that heritage, and it's something that I did deeply respect as writing this novel. So make sure you do listen to your black artists in these times of revolution, because some people may struggle to read books, but if you want to learn about the revolution that has been happening for decades, for years, for centuries, you can hear that through the music that black artists put out. So make sure you listen to the Jill Scott Herons, the Fela Kutis, the Tony Allens, the Rage Against the Machine, even though they're not a black group, the Public Enemies, any other African American originated forms of music. Make sure you listen to that to learn about the revolution during this Black Lives Matter movement. Thank you for watching.